In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use light selects from V-Ray to composite our robot and have even more control over the lighting in the scene. Let's move to this slide over here and talk about light selects. Light selects are the contribution of each light split into its own individual render pass. You can either render it as a raw light select, a specular, or diffuse light select. A diffuse light select will look a lot like a lighting pass. It will have the diffuse multiplied by the raw light. There are different ways of utilizing these light selects. The two ways I use are you either take all the diffuse light selects, plus them together, and then do the rest of the other passes as an add mode. Very similar to the additive technique that we saw in a previous lesson. The other technique is using all the raw light selects, adding them together, and then taking all those three and multiplying them by the diffuse, and then doing the GI, the reflection, and the other passes. Now, feel free to combine these with either the additive technique or the advanced additive technique. You can either use reflection filters, raw reflections, raw GI to get even more control over the image. Let's move on to After Effects and look at the light selects. So this is the file from the last lesson. Let's take our light selects for the fill light, make a comp, close all the other panels here, switch to 16-bit, and let's name this DT robot light selects build underscore comp. Now these are all the contributions for the fill light, and like I mentioned earlier, diffuse light select, very similar to what a lighting pass would look like. Your raw light select, very similar to a raw light pass from the previous lesson, and your spec. Let's increase the exposure here, and you see the specular from that light. Let's take all these three and call it fill. Let's do the same for the key. Let's take this, make a composition, call it key. Take that key, add it here, set it to an add. And finally, let's take the rim light. There were only 3 lights in the Maya scene. That's why there's only 3 sets of light selects. Let's call this rim and reveal it in the project. Take it here in this comp and add it. Now let's only look at the diffuse light select for each one of these passes. When adding them together, you will get something that is very similar to a lighting pass, like I said. You know, you have each light there. When added together, you get the lighting pass. The downside with this is that each one of these diffuse light selects have the diffuse pass array baked in them, and I prefer to keep that separate so I have even more control. In that case, I will only use the raw light select. Let's frame this so you can see it better. You have your key or your rim and your fill. Now when you get them all together, you get something very similar to your raw light from the previous lesson. Then what I would do is I would take, let's move all this here to the pre-comps folder. I would take my diffuse, set it here, and multiply it. Now we have our lighting pass again. And then let's, obviously, like we did on the last lesson, let's pre-multiply all of these passes. Let's go inside the rim light and then pre-multiply this, delete all these other passes, pre-multiply, delete, and pre-multiply this again. Okay. We go here and add the rest. We're going to add our GI, set it to add, pre-multiply. Now for our spec, we're going to use the spec for each light. That way we can make our own and have total control over it. Take this, make our own composition, call it spec light selects. Oh, we're missing one. Let's add the rim light, rim spec. Okay, set them to add. Let's go to a frame around here, increase the exposure, and you'll see them. Pre-multiply each one of these, and then add them here. Set to add, and let's add the last few passes, which are going to be reflection, refraction. You guys should probably be familiar with all of this already. Oh, let's add actually the pre-comp passes. Reflection, refraction. Like I said, you should be familiar with these passes from the previous lessons with about additive and advanced additive. So let's just move this to keep consistency. And if you look at this, it's very similar to our beauty pass. Let's add the beauty, set it to stencil alpha like we did. Duplicate this, set it to normal. Let's take a screenshot and let's compare. Now, you will notice that it's very similar. There's a problem that seems to happen in the area where the subsurface, this pinkish shader should be. Now, that is because all of these light selects, which should equal the raw light pass, have lighting where that subsurface shader is, which is something that doesn't happen on the raw light pass. So how do we fix this? We would fix that by taking the matte for the subsurface element. Let's make a comp out of that. You will notice that in the green channel, we have a matte for this subsurface shader. Set it to set matte, set it to green channel. Now we have an alpha over this. Let's call this matte underscore subsurface. Let's go back to the comp for each one of these light selects. Bring that matte in there. Set it to an adjustment layer. Set the fill. Let's add a fill and set it to black. Now we will do the same for all the other two passes. And now if we look at the main comp, we will see that it's actually matching what the raw light pass should look like. Now at the end, when we turn everything on again, you will see that it matches even closer our beauty pass from V-Ray. Now we can go even further with this and start adding the advanced additive technique elements like the raw GI and reflection filters, refraction filters, and start adding levels here. And you can see that you only have control over you can start adding levels here in the rim pass. Let's zoom in and start playing with the levels, and then you will have control over only that one light pass. Let's do the same for the key. Let's probably lower it. Let's make it more noticeable by switching the colors. You see how you have very, very accurate control over each light on this scene. So in the next lesson, we're going to go over subtractive techniques, and later we will go over how to utilize these light select techniques to actually make our robot look better using expressions for controlling all these levels on all these pre-comps and many other techniques. So in this lesson, we looked at how to utilize the light selects from V-Ray to get even more control in our lighting and in our composite.